I'm live. I'm reading out of Return to Elysium. It is a life of Joan Grant. Today is Saturday, the 25th of November 2023. This is a far memory book by Joan Grant. She passed away in 1989. This is her life as Lucina in the second century BC. In Greece, where she grew up, and she is now in Rome. And she's married Nigellus, and this is she's married Nigellus basically, chapter 13, entitled Stone Apollo. Nigellus had been married, they faked their death, and living together now, Lucina and Nigellus, who used to be a senator. I thought I had driven Julia out of our lives, but she began to be such a barrier between us that at last I decided it would be better to discuss the problem openly. Nigellus, I said, I know we had agreed never to mention the past, but we can't go on pretending this is the first child you have fathered. Julia may have found it an ordeal, but it will be quite different with me. It is a perfectly normal procedure. I shall probably do it more easily than one of your pedigree cows. My very dear, your magnificent courage inspires me to yet further devotion, but I implore you not to try to keep me in ignorance. He shuddered. Julia, with all her faults, is a brave woman, but she told me things that made me appalled at masculine brutality. Do you realize that if you die, I shall have murdered you? It's a pity you didn't murder Julia, I said crisply. Don't you realize she was trying to make you feel under such a heavy obligation that she could bully you without being afraid you might defend yourself? Why does she take so much trouble about her appearance if she doesn't want men to find her attractive? And why does she dare to resent the logical sequence? Oh dear, I have shocked you again. A peacock screamed from the edge of the woods. What an excellent example, I said. The male bird spreads his tail and does everything he can to beguile his mate. Would you have any sympathy with him if he later complained he had been seduced? It is just as true in reverse. I wanted you as my lover, and I find it right and natural that the process follows the natural sequence. I want this baby, you dear silly senator. Julia never wanted anything except herself. For 3 months he was happy and free from anxieties, but as the time of the birth grew closer, though it was not yet imminent, he became insistent that I should not be allowed to have it, with only Sempronia to help me. I have made discreet but meticulous inquiries in Arcana, he said fondly. There are 2 physicians who are most able men. One used to be famous in Rome until he came into property and retired from practice. I was afraid you might think me over-anxious, so I have engaged their services, and they will be coming to see you tomorrow, just to make sure that everything is going well. I was about to protest and then realized it would be a waste of energy. Both physicians were old, ignorant, and riddled with superstition. Salonius would have had them thrown out of his house if they had dared to enter it. I suffered myself to answer a multitude of impertinent and irrelevant questions. I listened to advice which I had no intention of obeying. I solemnly received several flasks of noisome concoctions which I would not have given to a sick goat. I found it difficult not to laugh while they were with me, and regretted that I dared not joke about them to Nigellus. Although I knew their forebodings were spurious and delivered only so that the patient would increase her fee out of a mistaken gratitude for escape from imaginary perils, I found it annoying to discover how receptive of ideas I had become. My mind knew the fears were nonsensical. My body discovered an excuse to become the center of attention. I really did not find it difficult to walk briskly uphill, and so, of course, I had to walk even further than I had intended. At least I could refuse to be bullied by my body, which had dared to become more gullible than my intellect. If only Nigellus had had the wit to understand that I was a Greek, with a disciplined mind and natural instincts. I should not have been forced to suffer even these minor discomforts. Surely it was enough to have to tolerate being such a ridiculous shape. I gave him pompous talks, based on the knowledge that I had used while with Salonius, about the vital need for pregnant women to remain uncontaminated by fear or ignorance. He listened, kissed me, told me in all seriousness not to dwell on dangers which he was sure would never materialize, and continued to treat me as though I suffered from some severe and probably mortal illness. Eventually it became easier to play the role he designed for me, with such passionate devotion and with such curious stupidity. I developed desires for food which I knew would be difficult to procure, and then changed my mind when it arrived and demanded something else. Or else I ate it because I was feeling guilty and was usually sick. I shall never forget the effect of prawns that cost more than their weight in gold but had wilted on the journey. Sempronia was the only person whose company I found congenial. She had had 14 children, now all grown up, except 2 who had died in infancy, and she delighted to describe in detail the circumstances of the various births. She had certain illogical beliefs as to herbs, which should be strewn on the floor, and gods who must be placated. But providing she was allowed to carry out these harmless rituals, I knew she would be no source of trouble, and I had confidence that she knew quite enough for me, for my needs. Or did she? Should I bear a dead child, or slowly bleed to death after it was born? Was there really a fundamental difference in the structure of slaves and patricians, even Greek patricians? When I found these thoughts crawling into my mind, I drove them out with well-rounded oaths, which Euripides would have appreciated. It was easy to defeat them in the daylight, but sometimes they assumed a certain dominance when I found it difficult to sleep. I longed for even an hour's conversation with Salonius. I heard him say to other women, "If you will only accept the fact that birth is natural, providing the child in your womb is welcome and not resented, you need no more attention than an animal. And if you have your husband to share your pains, you will find them trivial, or even ecstatic." Why did I want to hear Salonius say this to me? Why would the sound of his voice have made so great a difference when I knew the truth as well as he did? "You may as well recognize that you can't have Salonius," I said to myself firmly. "He thinks you're dead, and physicians don't use their skill for ghosts." And then I heard myself answer with a voice within the head, which can be so much louder than sound. Do women who die in childbirth still cry for a physician to release them from their pain? If Lucina was still a priest, could she help women who are beyond the skill of more ordinary leeches? There was a dream which followed such sequences. I was back in the temple, and a crowd of people were gathered outside the door. Some of them were very old, some were women with children at the breast, and there were the lame and the blind, and through their rags I could see running sores. I could have healed them. They needed only a word to make them whole, but they waited for me to open the door, and I could not move. I could not even call out to them. I used to wake hearing myself scream, drenched with sweat. Nigellus would hurry to me, bring hot stones wrapped in wool to warm my feet, heat broth and feed me with a spoon as though I was a small child. Then he would kneel beside me, holding my hand, soothing me with small comforting love words until I fell asleep. The next day I would try to repay him in so many small ways for loving me so much more than I could return. "When we have a child to play with, everything will be different," I said to reassure myself. "When I have a child of my own, I shall love it so much that I shall be able to give everyone what I owe to them. I shall be proud with loving." Sometimes I nearly told Nigellus that I had lied to the physicians, telling them that the baby was due a month later than it really was, but I never quite had the courage. I knew I should be safe with Sempronia, but those unwise old men might bring fear with them, might drive me away from health when I was not strong enough to defend my body with my mind. I counted the days carefully and intended to arrange for Nigellus to be away from home. But this plan failed, for nothing was sufficiently important to take him away for more than a few hours. Every morning we paced through the woods, I, who would have still found a fast walk reassuring, clinging to his arm. Every evening, though the spring was unusually mild, I let him wrap a cloak round my shoulders when we sat on the terrace to watch the sunset. If it made him feel happier, what did it matter that I was rather too warm? It was easy to conceal that the first pains had begun. I told him I was going to spend the morning arranging flowers, an occupation he considered suitable even to my delicate condition. Fortunately, it was the last day of the month, which he reserved for the tallies of the farm. As soon as he was out of sight and the dust thrown up by his chariot had begun to settle, I dropped the basket of hyacinths and went to find Sempronia. As soon as she saw me, she knew what was happening. She ceased to be the cook and became the confidante. "He's gone," I said. "We shall be clear until this evening." "Men are much better out of the way. Fuss they do, and more trouble than rats in the flour barrel." She opened the cupboard and took out the herbs which she had so carefully hoarded against this occasion. "Better go down and give something nice to Apollo," she said. "I'll take him a jar of the best wine later, when everything is satisfactory." I had reason to regret that I had put the statue so far from the house. It seemed a long walk, and I was glad that several marble benches, chosen by Nigellus, had escaped my veto. When I heard the chariot coming home, I told Sempronia to bolt the door. Poor Nigellus, he sounded distraught, but I was by then too concerned with my own feelings to be sympathetic. I heard a chariot galloping down the road. "I expect he is sent to Ancona," I said. "We are quite safe. They can't get here before tomorrow." "Sooner than that, so you had better hurry. A few more good pains and we shall be finished, if you put all you've got into it." Even curiosity was nearly subservient to the demands of the body, but I asked, "How can they get here sooner?" "He's not so stupid as most men. He has said to me several times that he thought you would have it sooner than you thought. The two old charlatans have been hidden in the village for the past 7 days, and making a rare commotion about the bugs in their beds and demanding to be brought here." She shook with laughter, her 3 remaining teeth yellow against the hard pink gums. "But the master wouldn't tell you. He won't let anything disturb my pretty. He thought they would get here in time. None of the men are as clever as old Sempronia. Bear down hard, and we shall make fools of the lot of them." I had underrated the fortitude of women. It was only by biting my lips until the blood was salt in my mouth that I managed not to scream. I should like to have been inspired by the heroic conduct of the Spartacus, but they never entered my mind. "It's a boy as like to his father as 2 beans in a row. Is he all right? There's nothing wrong with him?" Even when I had proved I had been right, I was still capable of being influenced by the threats of monsters. These accursed old men. "He sounds very healthy," I said. "Let me see him, just to be sure." He was a very ordinary baby, but to me entirely different to any other of the human species. Surely all babies were ugly. How magnificently clever of me to produce such a beautiful child. Instead of red, he was the color of a spring sunrise, and his skin and his delicate nails like almonds, and his hair, most babies, bald, but he quite definitely had hair. "He's so like my first that they might be twins," said Sempronia. "I could weep that my old drugs are too dry to give him suck." "Old dugs are too dry to give him suck." I suddenly took her hand and kissed it. Without her, I might have had a dead son. What did it matter if she wanted to pretend she had had a magical baby too? I had often rehearsed this scene in my mind. Nigellus coming into the room, and I, looking calm and beautiful, with our child in the curve of my arm. I had never decided what sex it was going to be, though Nigellus had been sure it must be a son. I was too tired for heroics, but I think I could have been adequate as the young mother if only I had not heard the chariot came up the road in such haste that the horses were driven across the lawns. Then the raised voice of Nigellus, who had obviously been waiting their arrival in a torment of impatience. What a fool he was to wait outside instead of offering to do something useful. That he had repeatedly implored me to open the door, and that there were plenty of servants to carry out any orders given by Sophronia, I found it convenient to ignore. "You had better take the baby to show him," I said. "I feel too tired to think of the right thing to say." She nodded and wrapped my son in a blanket. "I'll just give him a rub with oil and then come back to settle you down. A nice sleep is all you need." The door shut firmly behind her, and then I heard it open very quietly. Nigellus tiptoed to the bedside. I thought that after all his presence would be restful, but he was crying, the sobs shaking his body as though he had fever. "My Lucina, my sweet, beautiful Lucina, will you ever forgive me for letting you nearly die with only a cook to help you?" "She isn't a cook, she's the nurse. If you want to see our son, you had better ask her to show him to you." "I don't want to see him. I don't want anything except you. Are you sure you're safe?" "No, of course you're not, but you will be soon. I've got the physicians here." So I had gone through all of this, and he didn't even want to see the result. He was still trying to pretend it was his foresight which saved us both. I made an enormous effort to be tolerant and found it required too much energy. "If you bring those horrible old men in here, I shall be excessively rude to them. If you had a crumb of intelligence, you would kill them for making everything so difficult for me. Can't you understand? I'm tired. I want to go to sleep. I want to be left alone." He put something under my pillow and crept out of the room as though I had whipped him, as though he were suddenly old. I knew he would blame himself, not me. He would hate himself, not me. So I had no defense. I put my hand under my pillow and felt a smooth circle. It was a bracelet, plain gold, and I remembered I had once said to him that gold was the symbol of all the great realities. It was inscribed to Lucina in love. Could I ever learn to love my son enough for his father never to know I was so great a failure? I pulled the coverlet over my face so that at least I need not add to his disappointment with a sound of tears I was too weak to restrain. This was the end of chapter 13, and the next one is chapter 14, entitled Sour Wine. Wishing all a happy Saturday.